as other speakers have noted, I'd like to thank Dr. Lisa Wheelahan and the incredible graduate students that helped put this spectacular day together. Please give them a round of applause. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that I stand between Glenn's final comments and the celebration upstairs in the Nexus Lounge. So it's my distinct pleasure to be the chair for the final session of the day. My name is Laurel Schollen, and I'm a retired, as you can see, retired, which is why I'm smiling in that picture. That was before I was retired, but I'm smiling even more now. Retired VPA from Seneca College and Fleming College. This Vice President's keynote panel with these esteemed leaders are to reflect on lessons learned from COVID-19 in supporting tomorrow's college students. I spent almost 40 years on Ontario's public college system, and as I mentioned, retiring in June 2021, just around the time that we thought, or maybe it was me just hoping, that the pandemic was almost over. And like all of today's panel members, I recall the sleepless nights, working in ambiguity, or perhaps chaos, and supporting a team of administrators, faculty, and staff at Seneca to work miracles each day to assist students in their learning and their coping. Each college has stories of the extraordinary efforts they made to sustain good learning and student health since March 2020. And today we hear from 4 exemplary leaders about how they and their institutions, what they did, how they did it, and what they learned from the pandemic experience. This reflection will answer the questions, what can and might we do differently, and why? I'd like to begin with the introduction of each panelist will speak for 10 minutes without slides, and we'll have an opportunity for questions after. So the order of speakers is as per the table. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. It is Gina Antonacci. Gina is the Senior Vice President Academic at Humber College. She began her academic career as a faculty member and went on to hold numerous positions within the academic division at Humber. In her current role, she provides academic leadership to the college and recently led the Humber community through the creation of a new academic plan. Gina holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto, a Master of Science in Criminal Justice Administration from Niagara University, and a PhD in Higher Education from the University of Toronto. Gina's doctoral dissertation was entitled The Transformation of 3 Colleges to Institutes of Technology and Advanced Learning in Ontario. Gina, please give your remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's especially a pleasure to see Lisa. Every time I speak to her, I say, I miss you so much, and I really do. So I have 10 minutes to tell you about what we did over the last 2.5 years with regard to the pandemic. So I'm obviously only going to highlight some of the things that I think got us to where we are today, and then talk about a couple of the things that we need to address as a result of our journey. So like all of you, on March 13th, 2020, we shut down, and the direction to our faculty, our wonderful faculty, was we need to, and we picked our words very carefully, migrate your courses from face-to-face to online. Like all institutions, we had a number of courses that were already offered online, of course, and they had been developed the right way and gone through a process. But for the next week, we asked our faculty to go ahead and make that change. And what started to happen is we started to go through a process where we really began to introduce an infrastructure that would support this new way of teaching that needed to take place during this pandemic. There were about 5 times during the pandemic that we polled our students. And the one that I remember the most is the first one and the last one. The first one was devastating. It was like maybe it was the end of the first semester, that April 2020. The students were like, we hate this, we hate online. The faculty were really challenged. They didn't feel that they had enough resources. And so we really worked hard from that point on to find ways to support them and through the process. But there were a number of other things that we introduced to support the online environment. We virtualized over 100 of our software applications. And what that meant was the virtualization allowed our students to access software that in the past they could only access in a lab on their own computers from home. We also started, like probably all of you, lending programs because the digital divide became very clear for all of us. A couple of days after the pandemic started, we were told there's students sitting out front door of your institution and they're there to access Wi-Fi. So, we addressed that. We then looked at experimenting with various forms of educational technology. We tried different things, different ways. We ensured that we trained people in all of those different pieces. We looked at authentic assessment because the traditional ways of assessing weren't going to work. So we introduced new ways of engaging in authentic assessment. People were flipping the classroom. Literally years after we talked about flipping the classroom, people started flipping the classroom. We also tried new things. We tried HighFlex, and Laurel said in the prep, talk about things maybe that didn't work. And hello, HighFlex, right? That was like, we were like, just do HighFlex. And faculty are like, what is HighFlex? HighFlex is you teach both online and face-to-face at the exact same time, just turn on your computer. So we recognized that there were many challenges, and the only way that that was going to work is if we put a lot of resources into it. But one area that we did really well, and that I was so proud, Lori and I, my SVPA at the time, we did a presentation to the Board of Governors on how we adapted work integrated learning in this remote environment. And our faculty were just brilliant. They created all of these very creative work integrated learning opportunities that were measured against our quality assurance standards, one of which is many that we are continuing, but one of them is the Global Systems Gap Challenge, where our students were involved, 320 Humber students were involved with 90 other students from around the world. Rossi knows you were a part of it. We had mentors, we had institutions from around the world, and they were tasked with solving problems. And they did indeed do that. And that was definitely something that was very successful. We conducted applied research online. We introduced new programs online. During the COVID Long-Term Care Commission, it became clear that there was a gap in the long-term care system. They didn't have infection and control officers. We heard that. We created a program, ran it through the ministry, and got it approved like in no time. We got really good at this stuff. And so by the end of, as we were heading toward the end of the pandemic, when we started to do our surveys, we were starting to hear from people, hey, this is working. We know that there are ways that we can engage. We started to create our academic plan because it was time to renew our academic plan. And that was a wonderful process for us to be able to assess where people were at, to do a deep dive. How's it going? How are your feelings? And most important, what does the future look like? What is the academic future at Humber going to look like? During that process, it was really clear to us that our leaders, our academic leaders, our faculty were really clear about the fact that we have changed. We have transformed. We are not the institution that we were on March 13th, 2020. But the question was, within our academic plan, how do we take that learning and how do we build it in a way that enables us to ensure that we include a quality assurance process for all of our online courses? And how do we become more flexible, important goal in the plan? And how do we personalize learning? That was another important concept that came up in our academic plan. And so we were in a place where we really felt that we had an opportunity to dig deep and learn from all of our stakeholders. We also, by the way, had over 400 of our PAC members engaged in the consultation. And the reason we had 400 is because we did it virtually. We never would have had 400 human beings walk onto any of our campuses at any point. We had students involved, and it really was a great time for us to gather that information. So I will also tell you that all of this was happening at a time when we were all dealing with labor disruption. At Humber, we also had the pleasure of dealing with a student group that, really did not want to come back to school. They created a huge media presence for themselves, and it was really interesting to go through that process process, but we learned from every one of those pieces. We had faculty that didn't want to come back. And so that negotiation that took place was one of the learnings that we took away. So where are we now? What I will tell you is, just this week, the senior academic leadership team met to talk about something that is near and dear to all of us, space. So we did space utilization reports, and the most recent one in the past fall showed that our space utilization is down, as it should be, because we have far more hybrid courses, and we have many completely online courses. The question is, what do we do now with that space? How do we repurpose that space to turn it into labs, where utilization, by the way, is not down, it's right up? And then, we walked through some areas where faculty sit and work, and, there are not the same number of people that are there on campus. What does that mean to the space standards that we had set in the college? We had very clear space standards for faculty, leadership, program coordinators, deans, associate deans. So we are now in a place where we're really assessing what space means. We're also at a place where we're trying to understand, what does this new world of work, this new way of teaching and learning, is that for me? That my 10-minute bell? I will be quick. What does this new world of teaching and work mean in terms of building a culture? We love the Humber culture. And so how do we build our current culture based on the fact that there are just fewer people around? How do we not compromise the values that are important to us when it comes to being a community? And finally, how do we integrate quality assurance into this new world of work? How do we integrate quality assurance into being more flexible, offering many more ways of teaching and learning, as well as personalization, which is one of our big goals. Last thing I will say to you is, priority 3 of our academic plan is about innovation. And what it is it's basically an opportunity for faculty across the college and staff to basically identify programs that they want to, not so much programs, projects that they want to move forward that are innovative and creative. I have a pot of money, we are doing it. And I was so concerned that my nightmare would be that there would be apathy, that people wouldn't want to do it. And I'm so pleased to tell you that we had 44 applications for projects, all of which are innovative, creative, and will support the academic plan and where we're moving. So I've just got my little time, and I just want to say thank you so much. Really happy to be here, and I know that I have an opportunity today to learn from my colleagues and from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. Our next speaker is Mary Wilson. Dr. Mary Wilson is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University. She holds a doctorate of education in theory and policy studies from OISE. Mary is an award-winning educator, researcher, and administrator who has served as a senior leader in Ontario colleges and universities, and most recently as vice provost teaching and learning at Laurier. With a particular interest in higher professional and vocational education, her research and practice interests focus on the study of post-secondary education and the intersection of systems, institution, curriculum, faculty, and student development efforts that function to enable and disable change. Mary?
Thanks so much. It really is a joy to come together in community today to reflect on the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic to support future students. We really have not had time or bandwidth to have precisely these kinds of gatherings, and this has been a vital one today. So I add my comments to all of the gratitude for the organizers. It's been really important. In my contributions today, I want to focus on 2 big interrelated lessons that I find to be most compelling and most promising from our experiences. And I spent the first 6 months of the pandemic in the college system before transitioning to the university system. First, I think that our experiences throughout the pandemic taught us with new clarity that students cannot learn as well, and we cannot teach as well or work as well or lead as well when we are not well. We do not thrive when we're operating under conditions of persistent stress and anxiety, resource scarcity, when we don't all feel confident that we belong or that we can stay, when we are facing persistent waves of change and intersecting adversities. As the saying goes, you have to deal with Maslow before you can deal with Bloom. So to serve future students, I think colleges will most certainly benefit from renewed public funding. And as our advocacy for that continues, we can also make some progress in shoring up student service capacities and in creating more human-centered educational environments to improve the fundamental conditions for student learning. Human-centered education is currently more the focus of conversation in K-12 education globally, but I see so much promise in that body of work for colleges as well. Human-centered schools not only seek to thoroughly educate individuals within domains of knowledge or domains of practice, but also respect the personal, non-instrumental value of education and cultivate curiosity and care and compassion and relationship and citizenship in students. When I talk about human-centered education, I'm talking particularly about the excellent work emerging from internationally recognized authors on both theories and practices of relationship-rich education, particularly the work out of Elon University, with cultures of relentless welcome, as they call it within our institutions, models of compassionate challenge in learning. Most recently, Sarah Rose Kavanaugh's book on Mind Over Monsters and compassionate challenge as a method of proceeding in our education of students, as well as pedagogies of hope, pedagogies of care, and ungrading effort as a way to move the focus away from credentialing and grades as the coin of the realm for more feedback on learning. Well, Ontario colleges have long committed to the holistic education of students, and I would say globally, it's one of the things that distinguishes Ontario's college system for that focus on students and their holistic development. I think that we saw throughout the pandemic that there is room to both support our student services side more fulsomely, but also to integrate those human-centered educational practices into program curriculum and into policy, our academic policies as well. And I think the other lesson that I want to share is an affirmation of how responsive colleges are, how change capable colleges are. So I know that we are struggling with a certain degree of exhaustion right now in the system, but I do think we have an opportunity ahead of us to look at all of those rapidly deployed changes, many that Gina was mentioning, that we put into place to determine now what we need to retain and how we're going to resource that and sustain it into the future. Before I expand on these ideas a little bit more, I just want to say how important I think it is for us to recognize where we have just been. We have not just been grappling with a global pandemic. The effects of the pandemic have been compounded by global conflict, climate crisis, challenges to democratic institutions and processes, ascendant neoliberal policies and pressures on systems of education, racism on our campuses and in our broader society, rapidly developing advances and changes in our occupations and professions, acceleration of technological advances that are really impacting education. I'm surprised there hasn't been more conversation today about those large language models and generative AI tools like ChatGPT and what they might mean for us within systems of education. But these compounded influences have been felt acutely across education and some uniquely by technical vocational education and training institutions or our college system because of the intensive applied experiential forms of learning and the connection to workplace development. Globally, as the lockdowns were implemented, colleges around the world found that they had to suspend methods of instruction or assessments within entire courses, cancel forms of experiential learning, pause licensing until students could catch up on required placement hours, postpone certification exams. So students' educations were stopped, chopped, pivoted, and reordered. And we are going to feel the echo of that experience for quite some time to come yet in the sector. I'm sure Tim will talk about this a little bit more as well, but mental health issues were already on the rise prior to the start of the pandemic, and have been worse for historically marginalized students, many of whom we are privileged to educate in our college system. According to the most recent report of the Ontario College and University Campus Mental Health Coalition, the number of students on college and university campuses with identified mental health disabilities has more than doubled over the past 5 years. And we've seen increases in the percentage of post-secondary students reporting significant anxiety, depression, suicidality, as well as increases in the dispensing of mood and anxiety medications and hospitalizations for mental health reasons. So what I am arguing is that we need to make sure that our fundamental conditions for learning in our colleges are conducive to supporting the complexity of the experience right now for all of us who are working in this sector. On the student services side, I think we really have to continue the efforts that began before the pandemic, working not only all of the colleges together, but in concert with the universities to expand on-campus support services and community-based connections for care. I think that we also have to extend that into preparation for our faculty and staff. One of the things that we experienced during the pandemic is that staff and faculty more often were the first point of contact for students in crisis. And many of them felt really ill-prepared and ill-equipped to support students. So we need to make sure that we have some training and support for those individuals so that they can manage it. We also have to recognize that faculty and staff also struggled with lower motivation, greater distraction, stress, anxiety, disconnection from students and colleagues. And that is going to continue to echo as well. It really revealed for us, the pandemic conditions, the disparities and inequities, particularly along status lines with our faculty and staff. So something is going on here that deserves our attention, and that was revealed to us during the pandemic. I think that colleges have done tremendous work during the pandemic, that now what we need to do, I think, is to come together as heads of groups, as PACs, as colleagues on occasions like this to review what we did and why, because it was very student focused. It was to ensure that they had persistent access and could continue in their studies. So now what can we substantiate? What can we ingrain? When you think about what we did around compassionate grading and progression policies, around what we did for accommodations for student status, around our assessment methods and what we saw shift in terms of the frequency and nature of assessments, we saw less of a focus on high stakes assessments and more open book, repeated attempt, practice-based, AR, VR, some real innovations in those spaces that are more conducive to feedback for the purposes of learning. And I think that we need to think about where we can improve upon that. We have to think about what we did when we pivoted to emergency remote delivery in terms of the content that we put into our courses as well. There was more expanded interest in OER, in both the development and the sharing of open educational resources within curriculum. And that is a powerful area of collaboration for college as well, so that we can really create our own curriculum materials and content and provide those for students. So I think that there's a lot for us to review in terms of the kinds of structural barriers in our policies, in our curriculum, in the required order of courses, much of which we allowed to shift during the pandemic, that we can use to make sure that students have every opportunity to thrive in college and persist and graduate from their studies. If this work is done with purpose and structure now as a whole of sector approach, you can really reflect on the changes and hold the ones forward that make a difference for accessible, flexible, robust student learning. And I think these considerations matter so enormously much. The pandemic really served to remind us of the unique role that colleges play in individual and societal functioning and well-being. As David Guile and Lorna Unwin have just noted in a recent article reflecting on the pandemic, it revealed to us how diverse, interconnected, and contingent the different types of work undertaken by college graduates are in our societies. We see in greater relief now how college graduates are so essential to human and societal functioning and how complex and varied their responsibilities are. So while we're in this era of increasing pressure to more cost effectively, efficiently, quickly, and as close a tight fit to the labor market as we can graduate college students quickly, let's not forget that we are not just graduating workers, we are graduating humans who will join us in this project provincially of building the college sector and our economy as well. So with that, I will pass it on.
Thank you, Mary, for those very thoughtful comments and bringing things together. Our third speaker is Lynn Casimiro. A passionate proponent of andragogy, Dr. Lynn Casimiro holds a bachelor's in physical therapy, a master's in physical activity, a PhD in education, and a certificate in public administration. She's published extensively in the fields of online learning, interprofessional care, and access to French language services. She's been director of the Academic Health Council, as well as adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa. She's also director of education, researcher, and founding chair of the Research Ethics Board at the Montfort Hospital. She's currently vice president academic at La Cite in Ottawa, where she has implemented a competency-based approach. If I recall, it's a 7-year project. Lynn.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and thank you for sticking it out and staying with us for this afternoon for the panel. It's difficult to follow my esteemed colleagues here, but I'll try to be sort of complimentary to what they've already said. And I wanted to start off with one of the lessons learned. We'll go with what Laurel asked us to do initially, was look at things that we've learned from this transition and where we could improve based on it. And one of the lessons learned is it makes a difference where you started from. Each college's journey was a little bit different based on where they started it from. I remember speaking to some of my colleagues who said, High Flex, we've been doing this for years, right? Because they were in an environment where probably their students were dispersed over a vast territory. They were using technology already to outreach to them. Other colleges had a huge compendium of online programs that they had already, done through instructional design processes and very solid. Other colleges had other strengths. So for our college, we were mostly face-to-face. We did not have a lot of online programs. We do have some that have gone through the extensive sort of instructional design process, but we didn't have a lot. We were mostly a face-to-face college. But what we did have going for us is that we were in a competency-based approach. So that what Gina was referring to, that flip classroom type strategy, that was already very well implemented within the college by the time the pandemic hit. And that actually served us very, very, very well. But things said, we did have to sort of flip from a very much face-to-face model to I would say more of a distance or remote type teaching using technology in like a week, essentially, had to be done, in 5 days, it had to be done. And I just wanted to reflect back, because I'm sure you're all aware of the change management process, right? You've seen all these sort of images that shows that for change management, first you have resistance, and then you've got a chaotic period, and then you've got, sort of your early adopters that get on board, and then you push everybody else on board. And next thing you know, you get your new reality, right? So a year down the line, we did all that process within a week. So that's really interesting in itself. Like, I would love to have some academics look at this, like we're all at room, to look at how the heck did we get through a change management process that fast? So now when our faculty says we can't, we say, well, yeah, you can. You actually prove that you can. But it's very interesting how quickly we went through. The resistance phase lasted hours, maybe 48 hours, really, before we moved on. Now, in terms of what we needed to do as colleges, and I think most of my colleagues would agree that, we ended up doing almost similar things in different proportions based on our own reality. But I sort of positioned them in about 5 buckets, right? So we had, what supports did we need to put in place for our personnel to be able to do this? What supports did we need to put in place for our students to be able to do this? What did we have to do in terms of labor relations? It actually was a huge part of what we had to do to make sure to get this done. We had the whole technology bucket that we had to deal with, and then we had a communications piece that we had to consider. So if we come back to the student supports, so in our case, which was amazing to me, within 24 hours, we had set up a new website for our students that told them teaching and learning distance using Teams, right? Because we weren't using this before the pandemic. So using Teams, these are the tricks. How do you stay engaged in your class? How do you connect? What do you do if you don't have access to internet? Who do you call? All this was set up within 24 hours. Then a second website for the faculty members saying, this was learning and teaching in an online environment using Teams, same thing again. So we had all of our resources within the college sort of pooling together and providing this information within the websites so that during that week they were doing their transition, they could get this done. Every college had to do something similar or leverage what they already had to be able to do it. That's pretty amazing. Then for our college, we put a call out to just the personnel and said, who wants to volunteer, who's very good with technology and wants to help others in doing this? So we had about 12 faculty members and that joined the rest of our instructional designers and our pedagogy consultants and all of those people. And they were pretty much made themselves available 24/7 to help faculty members figure out how they could do this online. So that particular strategy is still ongoing today. So we basically, in a very, very short time, created a community of practice that's still ongoing today. It has changed sort of vocation as we're moving along, but it's still in operations today. So that, I think, was a good thing. That was a good lesson learned. We would do that again if we had to do it again. Hopefully not. And then from the student perspective, we had to make sure that they had all the necessary supports in place to be able to do this. I'm not going to go into what Mary was mentioning because all of those support services had to become virtual overnight as well. So we're just going to skip that part. So labor relations, that was a big piece, and we needed to figure out, it was all around which equipment we were going to provide. And for some colleges, maybe they had the budget for it. We didn't have the budget to buy everybody overnight a new desk, a new office chair, a new computer, a new screen, to be able to work from home. We actually had requests to be able to renovate a basement so that they could do. So, no, but this was part of the things we were trying to deal with in the midst of trying to go online. And this is just one example. I'm sure we all have stories like this. Yes. We also spent a lot of time around tax implications. Are we now basically able to claim the space that we work from home? And a lot of requests were being asked. So there's a lot of energy from the leadership team around trying to find some of those answers to keep them engaged as well. They were very legitimate questions, but we also needed them to be engaged to be able to support our learners. In terms of communications, that was really interesting because not only did we have to think about our internal communications. How do we keep our students informed, our personnel informed? But we also had to do a lot of external communication. How do we reassure the community? How do we show them that we're safe or that what we're doing is actually worthwhile, that they're actually learning online, even though like some of them, there's different perceptions out there. But there was also a lot of coordination we needed to do between colleges. We had to share because there's no way we could do this by ourselves. There was a lot of varying informations coming out there. We had different things coming out from regional public health offices, different from the ministry, different from the World Health Organizations, different from what was coming out from the states. And we were getting bombarded by questions and requests for information. So lesson learned from our college, our communications team is 3. So I think our communications could have been better. We did the best we could. Everybody rolled up their sleeves. We were all involved. But the communications piece was extremely important in terms of what Mary was speaking about reassuring about that mental health, reassuring people, making sure that they were okay, was a lot about letting them know about where we were going and how we were doing. So I think in that part, we could have done a better job at our college, maybe other colleges, maybe some did very, very well. In our college, I think we should probably have hired someone immediately to just take care of the comms all the way through, because there was so much to be done. But one of the strengths was that collaboration between colleges, but in our region, I was from our main campus is in the Ottawa region. So the two universities and two colleges, we continually shared our decisions before announcing it to the public to make sure that we were sort of aligned. And if we were doing things a little bit differently, that we were able to justify it. So that was a strength. And we've continued that kind of collaboration since. So that's really, really good. Now, coming out of the pandemic, if we look after the first year of the pandemic, I started looking at the satisfaction, student satisfaction, but the ones that they provide at the end of each course. In French, we say la rétroaction en salle de classe. So it's student satisfaction at the end of student feedback. Thank you. So the student feedback questionnaire, because the student satisfaction only comes up once a year. So the student feedback I was able to follow. And what was really interesting and surprised us to no end for our college anyways, at the end, between fall 2019 and fall 2020, our satisfaction rates actually went up for all of the programs and all of the schools, except for social sciences. Social sciences preferred the face-to-face business. Surprise. So, but it was really interesting. It really surprised us. And we're talking like quite high in terms of where we're going. Our retention rates were really high. So we're going, okay, we're on to something here. One of the things that our college did, because of that community practice we set up, we had very little reliance on the invigilating systems. So the proctor tracks of this world, we used very little of it. The only service that used it a bit more, or actually a lot more, was our registrar, who was using it for some of the testing they were doing for admissions. But for our programs, we used very little of it. But what we did is we did hire extra sort of support faculty, if you want, for some of our faculty members to do oral exams, to do sort of really hands-on stuff. We had our mechanics program. Basically, what he was doing was asking their students to find a car anywhere near the vicinity and gave them an exam to do on that particular model. So they had to send to the teacher So, yeah, we had one teacher that she didn't have a whiteboard, so she was using her shower, which was white in the back, to write. So students could see. I mean, I'm telling you, necessity is the mother of invention. So, but we were able to get them to get the workarounds, and it has had a lasting change with the way our faculty members now do evaluations. So that's very, very positive. Now, since then, what do we do in terms of how do we continue? We can't just go back to the almost 100% face-to-face model we had at our college. So what we started doing is we applied certain criteria in order to decide what we would do online and what we would do face-to-face and what we would put in a high flex model or a hybrid model. So we did a survey last fall with our students. So we've been using different proportions right now based on discussion with our faculty and discussion with our directors and needs of the type of clientele that are coming in. And what we were surprised last fall to find, remember I told you about these wonderful satisfaction sort of feedback? It was kind of difficult in this new era in pleasing everybody. So if we went online, because using our criteria, most of our students would like online. Well, generally speaking, we had at least 20%, if not 25% of our clientele that was very disappointed, that really wanted to be face-to-face. And if we did face-to-face, because that's what the sort of clientele sort of looked like, and I can talk about those criteria later if any of you have questions around that. Well, a good percentage of them, 25% of them, were unhappy and wanted to be online or had to actually stop their studies because they couldn't do it in the face-to-face format. The only approach that was almost unanimous was the high flex. So 95% of our students that did high flex were satisfied with that approach, but we can't use it for everything either. So, and ideally, students would love to choose. They would like to choose, if I can follow, if there's multiple sections, can I choose to do my course face-to-face? And my other colleague who likes it online, can they choose to do it online? Well, our systems can't allow that. Our systems at our college, I would love to hear about your systems, but ours doesn't work. We're actually changing all of our systems at the college, but it's a limitation. So it's very difficult to find a set of criteria that will allow us to really respond to the needs now of our learners, which have evolved greatly since the pandemic. They are asking for more, and they are asking for different. So we've done this survey with the learners, and I've got a whole bunch of data on that. And where we were finding programs or groups of programs where there was dissension, where we had as many that wanted online, that wanted face-to-face, we actually did in-depth interviews with them. I got the report back sort of last week. So we're just going through that right now to be able to come up with the best criteria possible to guide our directors and our faculty and choosing the best modality to be able to deliver our programs. So that's sort of the work that we've been doing now. And we've been working closely with our union on this because they've been following sort of the type of work we've been doing. And it's we're progressing, but right now what we realize is I don't think we're equipped yet to be able to respond to all those needs. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Tim has to say, but I just want to share those aspects, which I think were complementary to my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. Certainly necessity is the mother of invention. I thought I was okay. And then as you were describing things, I was actually having flashbacks. So I started shaking a bit, and then you told the story about the shower. And I thought, probably really interesting discussion about who's going to clean the bathroom and what you might learn, right, from that. But thank you so much, Lynn, your usual energy. Our last speaker is Tim Fricker, and I want to thank Tim so much for agreeing to be part of the panel, which he learned about last night about 9 o'clock at night. So Tim is pinch hitting for Rick Anderson, who couldn't be here. Tim brings, of course, the student services, student affairs perspective to this panel, which is integral and imperative. A little bit about Tim. For over 2 decades, Tim has worked with within many areas of post-secondary education, including colleges, universities, and professional associations, and the private sector. His career started in student housing and residence life, and then he moved into leading campus-wide advising, student success, and retention initiatives, and has continued into broad student affairs executive roles. Tim is currently the Dean of Students at Conestoga College, and he oversees a portfolio of student support programs that include health, counseling, accessible learning, testing services, advising, student engagement, student rights and responsibilities, sexual and gender-based violence, and campus management. All of these areas are incredibly important to the discussions that we're having today. Previously, Tim worked at Mohawk College as the Director of Student Success Initiatives, and then as Dean of Students. At the time Tim was at Mohawk, he launched Canada's only research center focused primarily on student success, and he led a variety of studies focused on academic advising, psychologically attuned communication, learning and skills assessment, and student services. A warm welcome for Tim Fricker.
And I'm going to try to sit, if that's okay with everybody else, just because all my notes are here and I didn't print them off because I was thinking about it late last night, and I continued to make notes so I can think about and respond to the great comments that everybody else has made. It's a privilege to be here today. I'm really privileged to be able to participate. I heard a lot of things from my colleagues here that I really want to honor for a second. I heard a whole lot about listening to student feedback. As a student affairs professional, I care deeply about what students have to say, and to hear all of my colleagues talk about student feedback throughout the pandemic, to me, is important. I heard about technology. I heard about Maslow and basic needs. These are really, really important things that I'm not sure we talk enough about. I heard about relationship-rich education. It's something that I learned about through my PhD work and my dissertation. I have recommendations around that. I might talk about it a little bit, but I think we are on the cusp of rethinking what our relationship is with our students. What does that mean? And I think we need to think about that more. I heard lots about wellness of our faculty and of our staff. And while the wellness of our students is incredibly important, we as administrators also have to think deeply about the wellness of our faculty and staff to make sure they are equipped to support our students. And so I just want to say that I appreciate those sentiments that I heard from the colleagues. So again, I am a pinch hitter today. I like the baseball reference only because Charles Pascal, who also recently left us, was a big baseball fan. I had the privilege of learning from him through this program, the Community College Leadership Program. And I remember trying to challenge him, as silly as that was, with some ideas, and of course. And he said to me, Tim, it's all about leadership. It's about leadership. We need to foster leaders and leadership. And so when I think about student affairs and student services, how do we do that? And I think we need to think more about that as a sector, especially in student affairs and services. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've had a few different roles during the pandemic. I was at Mohawk. I had the birth of a new child, so I had a parental leave. I made a move to Conestoga College, and I also was able to teach a course for my first time at the post-secondary level. All of these things make me think about what it means to be a student, what it means to be human, and how to live through a pandemic and to support people in the work that they do, whether their work is teaching, whether their work is serving students, or whether their work is being a student. So a couple thoughts that I want to share. Things we were thinking about in student affairs and services before the pandemic, innovations that I think were happening during the pandemic, and maybe what we need to keep thinking about. And I'm going to say after, because I think the World Health Organization only just moved away from the word pandemic like less than a month ago. So part of me feels like we're still a little bit premature talking about after, because there's still so much work to do. So before, finances, student affairs and services have a whole ton of funding. Well, let's not say a ton. The majority of the funding that we have in many ways comes from compulsory student ancillary fees. And I think for 3 years, I was redoing our framework for fees at Mohawk because of student choice initiative and a variety of different things. And that made it harder to deliver more services because the fees framework was changing. Prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of issues that were at the forefront. Mental health, there was new funding, that's great. We've heard a lot about that today, but mental health was very much an issue. There were new mandates for standalone sexual violence policies on our campus. That's very important work. Every college was working on those things and reflecting on those policies. Truth and Reconciliation, that commission report was only a few years old. It's still relatively new. We still have a ton of work to do. It was high in our minds there. Accessibility and universal design for learning. We have accessibility advisors in just about all student affairs programs and services. They are some of the early student affairs professionals in the college system that do really important work to ensure that all of our learners can be successful. And work was being started on the education standards that is now out, and Colleges Ontario has recently provided comments to the ministry on. We need to think about the implications for that education standard now and into the future. Internationalization had started in a new way. There was an opening up from the current government for relationships with private colleges to deliver education, and that increased international enrollments. That is core to the funding and the finances of many institutions. It also brought new and different challenges to supporting our students. And that's something that we were thinking about then. Work that I was involved in that was very much a topic of the day was student success. And we looked at it, I think, with a really positive, wide lens, thinking about advising, thinking about psychologically attuned communication, thinking about at-risk students, thinking about equitable outcomes. there was funding out there for those kinds of things. It's not quite there now because our attention has shifted. I think during the pandemic, all of those things that we were thinking about became harder, became more acute, became things that we had to consider in different ways. So maybe before I talk about some of the innovations that I think came into place, what happened? I think we were thinking about basic student needs a whole lot more. We heard about lending programs and laptops and Wi-Fi in our rural and indigenous communities. My goodness, how do students learn if we don't have access to the basic technology needs these days? And those were big conversations. Even things around basics in terms of registration and payment processes, I know our registrar's offices were worried about quite a bit because many of our students still relied on in-person payment. And those are basics, but so critical to our institutions. Service delivery was enormous. It changed. We had to think about it. We had to modify the way that we were delivering services in ways that we would have never considered offering student leadership programming purely online. How do you do that? I don't know, but we figured it out and we started doing that. Orientation, for example, as well. I think enrollment and financial concerns that many colleges experienced, that has a direct impact on student affairs and services as well. We get a proportion of those funds through compulsory ancillary fees, and that changed quite dramatically. And I know for me, there's a certain portion of operating dollars that were provided, and at my institution at the time, there were cuts. I was required to hit a certain percentage, and that meant that many part-time student affairs professionals were put on leave or lost their jobs. And so a lot of the cuts affect those units. And still, years later, we are still thinking about how do we restaff some of those areas and staff differently. So the work that was done in student affairs in many areas were with less people and less money to do really difficult, complex things. Health expertise. Myself, directors of health and counseling units were relied upon for their expertise and relationships with local clinics, with public health, to sit at very high tables, and sometimes to advise the institution on communications to students related to the pandemic. That may not be present everywhere, but it was very much in my world where I was at and some of my colleagues, a big contribution that student affairs professionals made to our institutions. And then equity and inclusion, the number of issues that came up during the pandemic. Our students, many of them with such a diverse population, speak loudly through our student associations, speak loudly to our counselors, speak loudly to our staff for very progressive social justice agendas. And we are hearing and feeling those concerns and expecting and wanting our institutions to respond in ways that our institutions don't often feel comfortable responding because we are very careful about how we do those things. But those are like pressures that student affairs leaders, myself included, feel. How do we honor those feelings of the students? How do we honor those things in our institutions if it's not something that is top of mind, perhaps, or the primary message that we want to put out through press releases and activities? But those are things that happen in student affairs quite regularly. Innovations. I moved to Conestoga about 1.5 years ago. And I know at Mohawk and at many places, the amount of work that was done to support with vaccines, to support with the validation of the vaccine mandates and all of those things was enormous. And we have at Conestoga a nurse practitioner-led model. Nurse practitioners have pretty much all of the same authorities as doctors, pretty much. They are incredible. And this is a model that not only served our students, but it served our staff and faculty and community throughout the pandemic in ways that was unimaginable to me. I think it is an approach, it's something we need to think about. The roles of our health centers during and after the pandemic was huge. And as our international population continues to grow across the sector, when you think about basic needs, my goodness, the health needs of our international students are significant and real. And we have insurance programs that don't honor pre-existing conditions for international students, and the pressure it puts on our system is significant. And so these staff do incredible work. They advocate, they find community connections to support our students in really meaningful ways. Advising is a big piece for me. It's a part of my dissertation research, but man, did we think about advising. And at Conestoga, it has expanded tremendously because we see the value of academic advising or student success advising, where faculty are feeling overloaded and they see an experts that can support our students in meaningful ways and make connections. And those referrals are happening far more now than they ever were. We have a care team. Many institutions call it a behavioral intervention team. Those are usually around threat assessment or threat to self or threat to others, but they have expanded into supporting students with complex needs. And those referrals are coming through. We have created a whole team, an interdisciplinary model to gather information, assess needs of students, and deploy meaningful human-centered interventions and supports in ways that I've never seen before. And I think these are the kinds of innovations, while they've existed for many years, have evolved and become really supportive mechanisms in our communities, on our campuses. And I think that will be something that needs to stay. And online orientation, my goodness, the way that at Mohawk we collaborated with faculty, with teaching and learning, to put everything in one place for students. I heard about new websites. All of that happened. All of that was huge and really meaningful to establish and keep the relationship with our students that we so desperately need to keep throughout. Look at this. See, now my computer just logged me out for a second. And I'm going to fix that. These innovations are still occurring. These things are still happening. I still think we're struggling to figure out the right mix I heard about in terms of flex or hybrid, but our students, and I'm going to say again, our international students primarily, they want the in-person delivery, and there are less people on campus now than there was prior to the pandemic. And we're trying to figure out across student services, new ways to break down our own silos, new ways to integrate our approach through one front desk, one window models to ensure that students can access the support they need, that there's a friendly face to receive them when they look for help, and make that two-step referral. Give them the information they need, and if that person can't get it, get them to the right person next. And that's a really big piece of the puzzle. I think I'll probably stay there. The last thing I'll say is bring it back to that statement that I said at the start that Charles Pascal talked about leadership. One of the things that I have learned about being a student affairs professional is that we are humble, but we see acute, complex things every single day. I have no doubt others see those things too, but almost all of them still end up somewhere in student services, whether it be in counseling, our care team, in accessibility, in advising, somewhere they land with us. And we hold a whole lot of stories that are meaningful to tell about struggles, about achievements, about needs that we need to address. And we probably have to work harder to figure out how to share that with senior administrators and get that information out, because there's great work happening, but there's great opportunities to do more and to do better. But we need both that quantitative data and we need that qualitative data. That, like, I would say broadly, we are practitioners. We're not data scientists. We are practitioners. We're not necessarily scholars or researchers. We are practitioners. We love people, and we're not good at our own PR. We probably need to do better at that. So that's where it comes down to leadership, and I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks very much, Tim. So we're pretty close to being on time. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and then Glenn will give us some closing remarks. So questions from the audience. Yes, Tim.
So at the beginning of the day, Glenn Jones said something that really stuck with me. And as we come to this panel, I wanted to ask about that as well. He said, you know, we're bringing in a lot of immigrants, and there's a lot of, you know, through our admissions, we're kind of, you know, we have these programs, we're right at the front of that, and we're right at the front of the introduction to Canada. And today I'm hearing more about human-centered, and that's wonderful. But what I haven't heard a lot of today is the issues that we have around housing. And all the issues you're talking about are connected to housing. When a student is stressed, you know, they don't have a great place to live. I know we've got one representative from Laurier. I know they have an upper year residence. They've got an apartment model. I don't see that at very many places. Universities and colleges have increased, you know, their enrollment, international enrollment, so rapidly that, and it's not just the universities and colleges that are part of the housing crisis, more complicated than that, but we are a big part of it. What has that conversation started to happen in your colleges and universities, and what do you think that's going to look like moving forward? You know, specifically, you know, if we're going to be human-centered, let's start with where are the students going to live, and are we caring for them in that space?
Thank you, Tim. Who wants to start with that one?
I'll start because I think it depends on the region, right? So I'll talk for the Ottawa region, but I'll move it on to Toronto because it's a huge issue in that area, and they'll have a lot more to say on the topic than I will. But just for the Ottawa area, we're quite well sort of connected with Ottawa Housing and other, so like we have multiple community services. So in terms of our international students coming into the region, we don't see the same kinds of issues that you're seeing in the greater Toronto area. But during the pandemic, just to share, because we wanted to make sure that they were still getting the supports that we need, because before it used to be more face-to-face, not a lot of that was happening, it was more virtual. And what we did is we took our recruitment marketing team, and they switched roles, and all they did was call students and make sure they were okay, that they had food, that they had housing, that they had whatever they needed, so we could outreach, and not only just the international students, but they were doing it with the rest of the students. If we didn't have news from some students in a while, we had a way for the faculty members to signal that we had sort of centralized a way to provide that information, and the team of recruitment marketing and our international team was following up. So in that, I think that was a good strategy. It worked well for us. But for the Ottawa area, we have all of the community partners on board, and they are working very closely with the two colleges and the two universities in the area on making sure the housing is available for all of our students, but especially our international students. I'll just pass it on because it is a different element.
I'll just very quickly, two things that I wanted to bring to your attention, one of which is the Council of Presidents in Ontario recently approved a new set of standards for international students, and all colleges in Ontario must adhere to these standards. One of the standards is indeed related to housing, and there's a requirement that all of us who take international students, which I believe is everyone, must adhere to the standard that enables us to provide our students with access to resources related to it. So I just wanted to put that on the table and say that this has been a conversation that we have been having. About 6 years ago at Humber, we did an assessment of our residences to determine the percentage, the ratio, if you will, between the resident spaces that we have and the students that we have. We looked at international, we looked at domestic, we looked at commuters. We'd have like 1,000 buses a day that come onto our property, so we know that many of our students are commuting. We are currently building a new residence at our Lakeshore campus. It's within the context of our Humber Cultural Hub. It's 320 beds, and it will be ready in 2026. So that's what we're doing. But I mean, is it ever enough? I don't know. But it's certainly, I would say that with the conversation around the standards, it is being discussed and talked about. And those standards are being assessed through the audit process with OCQS, which all of us are, we are held accountable through that process. So it's not something that is just out there. It is something that we have to demonstrate that we have met the requirements.
Thank you. Tim wants to.
I can tell you housing is absolutely a hot topic, not just for our institutions, but our communities. If I think about the thinking that is happening right now about evolving student housing is really big and really important. So I would argue potentially our current model for mandatory meal plans, the size of those meal plans, the style of the rooms, the size of the rooms, the capacity of rooms, these are all assumptions that probably do not fit with a growing international population, nor does the price point. So there's a lot of work and thinking happening about those things, and for on-campus residences for which institutions have control over. Off-campus, we can't do a whole lot about. We can be supportive and think about things with partners in the community, but for on-campus models, I think you're going to see an evolution over time that is required and needed to consider those things to make on-campus more palatable for our international students. And I think that is meaningful and important. But housing is a long-term thing. That's the hardest part, is that, you know, it's going to take a while to figure that out, but we have to work together on it.
Thank you. And also for, you know, smaller communities, we want the graduates to stay in the community. It's long past residence, it's housing at writ large. We know that that's problematic for many of the smaller communities as well, as is transit and all those other things. So it's a very wicked problem, but one that, you know, has to be tackled. And also we've seen innovations in the past where universities, I'm thinking of Toronto Metropolitan University, when faced with a crunch when, you know, with the first year enrollment many years ago, took over a hotel. Not the ideal situation, but when we look at, you know, lots of vacancies in office buildings, et cetera, you know, asking how might we repurpose some spaces and be builders with the communities. So, Mary, did you have any thoughts on that one? No. Okay. We have time for one question. If it's a fast one, yes, Mary Lynn.
Requiring sick notes.
Any others?
I wrote a briefing note not that long ago with a handful of partners just to say that asking for sick notes, doctor's notes, is a drain on the system. And we need to think about, as a college sector, what I would call not accommodations, but academic considerations, the compassionate approach to supporting students that have life stuff come up that ought not to require some sort of sick note or evidence. So I'm not answering your question directly, but sick notes, my goodness, yes, let's get rid of them. They're not useful in any way, shape, or form. The other thing that I'm trying to formulate my thought around, I think we cannot continue to rest on previous assumptions. So I don't know how to say what do we stop doing, but I think we need to stop with a lot of our old assumptions and revalidate what are our basic assumptions moving forward. And I have to tell you, my new frame is more about the basic needs of our students than ever before. So,
yeah. Any other comments?
Yeah, and I agree. We've stopped taking in sick notes as well. Same strategy is one of them. It is, and it was time consuming. Yes, absolutely. But we are reviewing a whole PLAR process as well, our equivalency process, which is extremely labor intensive. And we're looking at ways that we can look at it globally rather than going hour by hour, course by course, which is very tedious, very, very labor intensive, and finding a way that's more in approach with a competency-based approach and saying, have they demonstrated competency or not? So just to allow learners, and we do have a strategy right now, like if a learner has failed a course, they could later down the program do a PLAR to see if they can pass the course. It's all things that they can do, but we're actually allowing faculty members to go back if they had failed a course, because there's one of the developmental indicators that they haven't found. I have it, my sort of our own language at the college, but it's the same thing as the sort of the objectives and that kind of thing. So if the learning indicators are, some of them are have not been met, but if the student demonstrates it with the particular assessment or piece of work that was handed in and was able to demonstrate that, the faculty member has the ability to be able to apply a rubric and then change the note. It is within the academic leadership of the faculty to decide to do this or not, but we have a process in place now in order to do that. So again, it's reducing the labor sensitivity of having to, do a PLAR, get that assessed, and we're letting the faculty, we've made sure that it was very clear, clean, that we can demonstrate that they have met what needed to be met in order to be able to pass the course, but we're doing things differently. And that is coming out of COVID.
So I would echo that. I think that we should look at stopping those trip hazards that exist within our program structures and in our academic policies that cause our students to drop back in course load, bail out, pause out, and sometimes not complete or just lose coherence in their curriculum. So I think going back and examining all of those assumptions that we hold around course requisite structures, grade requirements, some of them are going to hold fast. They are important and we need to maintain them, but we also need to look at where we might be able to look at other ways to make sure that our students can progress in their studies if they can demonstrate their competency. The other thing I would say is we have to stop assuming that faculty professional development as educators is an induction only activity. It is a lifelong learning requirement, and our support for that within our institutional context is going to be one of the things that preserves the amazing quality of college education in Ontario.
I agree.
And with that, please give our illustrious panel a round of applause.
I'm just going to be 2 minutes, so relax. So thank you so much. What a wonderful panel to end the session with. And I learned so much about what you learned during the pandemic, which we hope we never have to use again, but we can still take these wonderful learnings from us. Just a couple of things to conclude. One is to remind you that this is an event that's organized by the Center for the Study of Canadian International Higher Education. You came onto our website. There is a space on that website, so you can sign up for information notices from time to time. We've been running a series of webinars. A number of people have said we should do this more often. I think we will do it more often. So stay connected. It's an umbrella for our faculty research activities, and it gives you a sense of new books and other activities taking place, and maybe ways in which we can be helpful in terms of distributing information on your events. We want to build partnerships and relationships. So pay attention if you're interested in continuing this conversation, because we'll be continuing ours and hopefully find ways to engage you in these continuing discussions. Second, I want to thank a bunch of people. Mostly I want to thank Lisa and her team for a tremendous job. And I know that Lisa will say a few words at the reception, but she's had a wonderful team. We also had a lot of support from the Department of Leadership, Higher and Adult Education, and from the Dean's Office, which has helped with some of the communication and other activities. So my thanks to everyone who played a role in helping bring this together and to facilitate what I think has been a very successful event. And my final thank you is to you. Thank you for taking the time to participate. Thank you for being so engaged. I really do think we need more of these policy conversations about where we're going and using the expertise within the college sector and the university sector together. There's so much we can do. So thank you very much for participating. I look forward to seeing you on the 12th floor at the Nexus Lounge for our little reception.